Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Reading Rainbows, where we're reading Inkheart by Cornelia Funke, and today we are reading chapters 51 and 52. Chapter 51, A Narrow Escape. "I don't know what it is," answered Fiver wretchedly. "There isn't any danger here at this moment, but it's coming. It's coming." Richard Adams, Watership Down. Farid heard footsteps just as they were making the torches. The torches had to be larger and more solid than those Dustfinger used in his shows, for they would have to burn a long time. Farid had already cut Silvertongue's hair with the knife Dustfinger had given him. It was short and bristly now, and at least that made Silvertongue look slightly different. Farid had also shown him the kind of earth he needed to rub on his face to darken his skin. No one must recognize them, not this time. But then he heard the footsteps. And voices. One was speaking angrily, the other laughed and called out, but they were still too far away for him to make out the words. Silvertongue picked up the torches, and Gwyn snapped at Farid's fingers as the boy pushed him roughly into the backpack. "Where can we hide, Farid? Where?" whispered Silvertongue. "I know a place." Farid threw the backpack over his shoulder and led Silvertongue over to the charred wall. He climbed over the blackened stones where there had once been a window, jumped down in the dry grass behind the wall, and crouched low. The metal cover he now pushed aside had buckled in the fire and was overgrown by alyssum. Its tiny white flowers rambled like snow over the opening. Farid had found the metal plate while he was exploring during the long hours he spent here with the silent and ever-reserved Dustfinger. He had jumped off the wall and noticed the hollow sound. Perhaps the space under it had originally been a store for perishable foodstuffs, but at least once before it had also been used as a hiding place. How does he know this? Silvertongue recoiled when he touched the skeleton. That's how. When he touched the skeleton in the darkness, it looked small, scarcely big enough for an adult, and it lay there in the cramped underground space quite peacefully, curled up as if it had laid down to sleep. Perhaps it was because it looked so peaceful that Farid was not afraid of it. If there was a ghost down here, he felt sure, it could be only a sad, pale creature, nothing to be frightened of. Most ghosts will not hurt you. There wasn't much space when Farid drew the metal cover across again. Silvertongue was tall, almost too tall to hide here, but it was reassuring to have him close, even if his heart was beating just as fast as Farid's own. The boy could feel every single beat as they crouched there side by side, listening for sounds from above. The voices were coming closer, but it was difficult to make them out, for the ground muffled them, as if they came from another world. Once a foot stepped on the metal cover, and Farid dug his fingers into Silvertongue's arm and wouldn't let him go until all was quiet again overhead. It was a long time before they dared trust the silence, such a very long time that once or twice Farid turned his head because he imagined that the skeleton had moved. When Silvertongue cautiously raised the metal cover and looked out, it did seem as if they really had gone. Only the grasshoppers were chirping tirelessly, and a bird, startled, flew up from the charred wall. Whoever it was had taken everything with them, the blankets, the sweater that Farid had curled up in at night like a snail going into its shell, even the blood-stained bandages that Silvertongue had tied around the boy's forehead the night they'd been shot at. "Never mind," said Silvertongue as they stood beside their cold fireplace. "We won't be needing our blankets tonight." Then he ran his fingers through Farid's dark hair. "What would I do without you, Master Scout, Rabbit Catcher, finder of hiding places?" he asked. Farid stared at his bare toes and smiled. It's so nice that, at least Mortimer is willing to comfort Farid and say good things, because he knows that that'll help him to be calmer and, put him at ease, so to speak. Yeah, Dustfinger was just like, do this, stop bugging me, blah, blah, blah. Whereas Mortimer's all, what would I do without you? Anyway, moving on. Chapter 52, A Fragile Little Thing. When she expressed a doubtful hope that Tinker Bell would be glad to see her, he said, "Who is Tinker Bell?" "Oh, Peter," she said, shocked, but even when she explained he could not remember. "There are such a lot of them," he said. "I expect she is no more." I expect he was right, for fairies don't live long, but they are so little that a short time seems a good while to them. J. M. Barrie, Peter Pan. Capricorn's men were looking for Dustfinger in the wrong place. He hadn't left the village. He hadn't even tried. Dustfinger was in Basta's house. That's actually a pretty good hiding place if you come to think of it. Because, for one, Basta's locked up, down there in the crypt. And for another, he's so hated that, why would anyone be going to his house for any reason if they know that Basta's not there? It was in an alley just behind Capricorn's yard, surrounded by empty houses inhabited only by cats and rats. Basta did not want neighbors. Indeed, he wanted no other company but Capricorn's. Dustfinger knew Basta would have slept on the threshold of Capricorn's room if he'd been allowed to, but none of the men lived in the main house. They stood guard there, that was all. They ate in the church and slept in one or the other of the many abandoned houses in the village. That was the rule, and it could not be broken. Most of the men kept moving around, living in one house and going on to another when the roof began to leak. Only Basta had lived in the same place ever since they came to the village. Dustfinger suspected he had chosen that house because St. John's wort grew beside the door, and there was no other plant with such a reputation for keeping away evil. Leaving aside the evil in Basta's own heart. Now, I've never heard of St. John's wort warding away evil. I've heard that it's, good as a medicinal plant, but I've never heard of it, warding away evil. But then again, I don't know a whole lot about this sort of thing. Like most of the buildings in the village, the house was built of gray stone, with black painted shutters that Basta usually kept closed, and on which he had painted the signs he believed would keep bad luck away, just like the yellow flower of St. John's wort. Sometimes Dustfinger thought Basta's constant fear of curses and sudden disaster probably arose from his terror of the darkness within himself, which made him assume that the rest of the world must be exactly the same. Dustfinger had been lucky to make it as far as Basta's house. He'd run into a whole crowd of Capricorn's men almost as soon as he stumbled out of the church. Of course they had recognized him instantly. Basta had long ago made that a certainty. But their surprise had given Dustfinger just enough time to disappear down one of the alleys. Fortunately, he knew every nook and cranny of this accursed village. He had meant to make for the parking area and go on into the hills, but then he'd thought of Basta's empty house. He had forced his way through holes in the walls, crawled through cellars, and ducked down behind the parapets of balconies that were no longer used. When it came to hiding, even Gwyn had nothing to teach Dustfinger. A strange sense of curiosity had always driven him to explore the hidden, forgotten corners of this and any other place, and all that knowledge had now come in useful. I have to hand it to Dustfinger. He is pretty smart in that regard. All the time he's spent there in Capricorn's village, he had to know, at least on some level, that, they may turn on him at some point. And so being able to know all these little secret hidden places would be an advantage, and that's coming true now. He was out of breath when he finally reached Basta's house. Basta was probably the only man in Capricorn's village who locked his front door, but the lock was no great obstacle to Dustfinger. He let himself in and hid in the attic until his heart had slowed down. Even though the wooden planks were so rotten, he feared he would go through the floor every step. Downstairs, he found enough food in Basta's kitchen to quell the hunger that had been gnawing like a worm at the walls of his stomach. Neither he nor Risa had been given anything to eat since they were put in those nets, so it was doubly satisfying to fill his belly with Basta's food. When he'd partially satisfied his hunger, he opened one of the shutters just a crack, so he could have warning in good time of any approaching footsteps. But the only sound that met his ears was a tinkling, so faint he could hardly hear it. Only then did he remember the fairy that Meggie had read into this world, that normally had no fairies. He found her in Basta's bedroom. The room contained nothing but a bed and a chest of drawers on which a number of bricks lay carefully arranged side by side, all of them covered with soot. They said in the village that whenever Capricorn had a house set on fire, Basta took away a brick or stone, even though he feared fire at other times, and clearly that story was true. What a, I want to say, morbid thing to do, oh, we're setting fire to this person's house and, possibly killing their whole family. Gee, I think I'll take a brick or a stone from their house to remember this by. That's just wrong. On one of the bricks stood a glass jug with a faint light coming from it, not much brighter than a glowworm would have made. The fairy was lying at the bottom of the glass, crumpled up like a butterfly just out of the cocoon. Basta had put a plate over the top of the jug, but the fragile little thing didn't look as if she had the strength to fly. When Dustfinger took the plate away, the fairy didn't even raise her head. Dustfinger put his hand into her glass prison and carefully took the little creature out. Her limbs were so delicate he was afraid his fingers would break them. The fairies he knew had looked different, smaller but stronger, with fair blue skin and 4 shimmering wings. This one had skin the same color as a human, a very pale human, and her wings were more like a butterfly than dragonfly wings. But would she like the same things to eat as the fairies he knew? It was worth a try. She looked half dead. Dustfinger took the pillow off Basta's bed and put it on the kitchen table, which was scrubbed clean. Everything in Basta's house was scrubbed clean, as spotless as his snow-white shirt. He laid the fairy on the pillow, then filled a dish with milk and put it on the table beside her. She immediately opened her eyes. So, in having a good sense of smell and a taste for milk, she seemed no different from the fairies he knew. He dipped his finger in the milk and let a white drop fall on her lips. She licked it up like a hungry little cat. Dustfinger trickled drop after drop into her mouth until she sat up and feebly beat her wings. Yeah, this is just, it's so sad to think about. 'Cause, here's this poor little creature, like probably not even the size of my hand. And, yeah, there she is laying weak and limp. And there's Dustfinger, cold calculating Dustfinger, who cares for basically himself and Risa, and that's it. And even then, he only cares for Risa as far as, being selfish for himself. Yeah, I think that part of his attraction to Risa is just a way at getting back at Dustfinger, or at Mortimer, rather. So, here he is, someone who basically doesn't care for anyone but himself, gently taking care of this little fairy who's half dead. Her face had a little color in it now, but although he spoke 3 fairy languages, he understood not a word of what she finally said in her faint tinkling voice. "What a pity," he whispered as she spread her wings and flew, rather unsteadily, up to the ceiling. "That means I can't ask you if you could make me invisible, or so small that you could carry me to Capricorn's festivities." The fairy looked down at him, tinkled something that he couldn't understand, and settled on the side of the kitchen cupboard. Dustfinger sat down on the only chair by Basta's kitchen table and looked up at her. "All the same," he said, "it's good to see someone like you again. If only the fire in this world had more of a sense of humor, and a troll or a glass man would look out of the trees now and then. Well, perhaps I could get used to the rest of it after all, the noise, the speed, the crowds, and the way the nights are so much lighter." He sat there in his worst enemy's kitchen for quite a long time, watching the fairy flying around the room, investigating everything, for fairies are naturally inquisitive, and this one was obviously no exception. Every now and then she stopped to sip her milk, and he filled the dish a second time. Once or twice footsteps approached, but each time they passed by the house. What a good thing Basta had no friends. Well, that's basically what I said earlier. The air that came in through the window was sultry. It made Dustfinger drowsy. The narrow strip of sky showing above the houses would stay light for many hours yet, long enough for him to make up his mind whether or not to go to Capricorn's festivities. Why should he go? He could get hold of the book later, sometime when all the excitement in the village had died down and everything was back to normal. And what about Risa? What was going to happen to her? The shadow would come for her. There was nothing to be done about that. Not by anyone, not even Silvertongue if he was really so crazy as to try. But Silvertongue didn't know about her, or about his daughter. At least there was no need to worry about Meggie, not now that she was Capricorn's favorite toy. Capricorn wouldn't let the shadow hurt her. I'm not so sure about that, to be honest. No, I won't go, thought Dustfinger. I'll hide here for a while. Tomorrow there will be no more Basta, that's one good thing. And perhaps I will go away from here, go away forever. No, he knew he wouldn't do that. Not while the book was here. The fairy had flown over to the window and was peering curiously out at the alley. "Forget it. Stay here," said Dustfinger. "Please. Believe me, it's no place for you out there." She looked at him quizzically, then folded her wings and knelt on the windowsill. And there she stayed, as if she couldn't decide between the hot room and the strange freedom to be found outside. And that's the end of that chapter. I hope you're enjoying it so far. And I'm eager to join you next time to continue the book. I hope you're having a great day.